Has anybody ever wondered about plants in Don't Starve? Not the grass or twigs or even the bushes, of course, but tree guards, grass gators, and even the playable character Wormwood. Furthermore, has anybody ever wondered about plant meat and how it's basically an oxymoron of itself? Or how there's several motile plants in the constant, and most of them have a direct correlation to the moon as well as the ability to think for themselves? How plants appear to always bloom in the moon's light, the moon's big plan, and why is it doing this to all life in the constant that it can reach? And what this says about the resident plant character Wormwood. I've wondered about all these things, and although I'm not certain, I'm going to do my best to figure out what exactly all these plants really are, and what their goal is, as well as the moon's. This is the moon plants theory. Okay guys, I know we're excited, but before we start, I do have to grift just a...
Yummers.
Yes, the video is going to be yummers. Anyways, I do have to grift a...
Yummers.
Grift a little.
Yummers.
Okay, yes, I will get to the theory in a minute.
Yummers.
Stop poking.
Yummers.
Stop it! Just give me...
Yummers.
Cut it out!
Yummers.
Stop it! Stop poking
Yummers.
me! Anyways, guys, we are on theory number 7. Ironically, in the theory before this, I said that we were close to covering all the lore factions and creatures in the constant, but then Clay decided to develop both the Crab King and the Bunny King, so I might have a slightly longer dance card before I can say I fully covered it. But before this video begins, I want to ask you all to consider supporting me if at any point during this video that you enjoy my theory. I do enjoy making theories, and I want to make them more commonly on my channel, and I may actually even be branching out to theories on other games sooner than expected. But theories are also significantly harder to make than my other videos, so please consider supporting me with a Patreon donation, channel membership, or just subscribing with notifications if you haven't already. As of writing this, we are basically only 1,000 away from the 100k milestone, and it would mean a great deal to me if we could hit it this year. But with that, my grift is over, and I will now begin the theory. First things first, I need to ask the question, what am I even looking for? We already know there are sentient plants in the constant, and those can come from both the moon and one motile plant. The tree guard comes from the shadows, or at least it appears so. Well, if I'm going off the previous theories I've done about other factions and races in the constant, it all rounds up to either 1, a god, 2, a leader or a powerful individual of some kind, or 3, just evolution over time. And, well, starting out, we have the answer of whether or not a god is involved almost instantly, as a majority of these moon plants, specifically the ones that get up and start moving around, come directly from the moon's dispersal on the constant. And we can get a very clear display, not only from the quotes in the game, but also from the way the moon moves itself, that yes, the moon very clearly is a living entity. And since I've also displayed the Na from Merm Theory as a god, I don't see why the moon wouldn't also fall under that title as well. But we aren't done with our intro synopsis just yet, and that's due to the fact that sentient plants simply do not appear all as though they come from the moon, and we need to know just how far that goes. We already have, as discussed, the moon plants like salamanders, carrats, and most importantly, wormwood, but as mentioned earlier, we also have plant creatures like tree guards that not only aren't moon aligned, but literally drop monster meat and have evil flowers growing around them. And lastly, we also have plant creatures with seemingly no alignment at all, like snaptooths and mandrakes. And with that, I think it really hits all the main bases we need to cover about these moon plants. Do all of them fall under the title of moon plant? I'm not certain yet, but I think I have all of them at least somewhat with a correlation. So, let's start from the beginning. Beginning our investigation, it starts, well, the same place it always does. Me scouring through the hieroglyphics and ancient murals of creatures, and trying to find any correlation to what I am looking for. And looking at the original ancient murals, we see the ancients interacting with stuff like carrots and other plants, before using shadows to start messing up everything, plants included. But we'll elaborate more on that later. However, we already have somewhat of a lead with carrots alone. Ancient arthropods carrying carrots down into the caves as they were hungry and scared, and using the nightmare fuel to mass-produce the carrots, which worked for a time until, well, we all know what happens next. I actually already went over this in my monster meat theory, where I theorized the consumption of corrupted carrots is what gives bunnymen their neo-nightmare fuel hybrid forms, when the one perceiving them is insane. However, in regards to carrots, there is no expression of shadow or nightmare fuel carrots in the game outside of bunnymen. Therefore, in regards to the carrots in the ruins, this more or less leads us to a dead end. Ironically, in regards to the moon making carrats, it actually leads us to the exact opposite of nightmare fuel carrots. As for the tree guards and totally normal trees, although they aren't considered shadow aligned, they are still containing the fuel and dropping monster meat. If you need proof of this also containing fuel, totally normal tree is a bit more obvious as it has evil flowers growing around it, and just a quick trip to the crafting lab, its petals literally make the fuel itself. So there's obviously a correlation between it if it always grows around it. As for the tree guard itself, it has a rather strange objective, and something I wouldn't expect from a nightmare-aligned creature, and that is that it actually protects the forest from harm. It isn't inherently hostile, and most surprisingly, it can be reasoned with. By planting a bunch of pine cones, the tree guard as a would-be attacker would simply stand down. This is rather strange, but it's also not unheard of for creatures of monster meat to be able to be reasoned with, and we still have some other things to solve for, so we'll have to come back to tree guards later. But with the exception of those trees and evil flowers, we really don't have any other correlation of nightmare-aligned plants. So as for the other depictions of ancient plants, my next stop was Hamlet. And on the surface, you might assume Hamlet's investigation was even worse. No statues of plants, and no murals depicting them. The only thing close to plant-like ancients in Hamlet would be the various hedges depicting pigs, werepigs, the Pig King, and beefalo, all of which, except the beefalo, I explained in my pig and daywalker theories. But there is one thing in Hamlet that does give us a huge lead to the motile plants in the Constant. Something that is considered to be the main antagonist of the Hamlet DLC. You probably know what it is. Why, it's Hamlet's own apocalypse and season system, of course. Now, it isn't too hard to put 2 and 2 together in regards to Hamlet's climate being our next lead, as the climate of an area ultimately decides whether or not plants and animal life grows there, but almost more importantly than anything, the sunlight. Now, make no mistake, there are a handful of plants that can grow in the world without sunlight, and almost every single fungi in existence can too. However, plants in general usually need sunlight, and if not sunlight, some type of light in general, and what may come as a surprise to many people, the color of light. When I was in elementary and middle school in our science classes, we often had numerous simple kid-friendly experiments we would talk about and perform throughout the year to get us warmed up to the scientific process, helping us understand stuff like the steps of the scientific method, analyzing results, setting up the experiment, etc. One of the most popular experiments that we did among teachers that I saw several times throughout these early years was that of the plant light experiment. The experiment goes as follows. We would put bean sprouts or other simple plants that we could easily track the growth of in 4 separate plant pots. Plant pot 1 was left in direct sunlight as the control group, plant pot 2 was exposed to a green LED light, plant pot 3 was exposed to a blue light, and plant pot 4 was exposed to a red light. When I was a kid, I thought that out of the 3, the green light would make the plant grow the most because it was green like the plant, the blue would be a close second, and the red would cause the plant to hardly grow at all. The results were the exact opposite. Not only did the plant under the green light grow the least of all, but it was also the weakest and wilted looking of the group. On the other hand, the red plant had not only grown more than both the blue and the green, it had also grown more than the one left out in direct sunlight. That's how I learned about synthetic lights, hydroponics, and isolated plant environments to expedite plant growth. And when we apply this knowledge to Hamlet, well, most of you know where I'm going with this. During an apocalypse, the moon blocks out the sun and stains the entire map in a permanent red hue, the same color that made the plants grow the largest. And make no mistake, there is still light coming from the moon, as the player wouldn't be able to see otherwise. Furthermore, we also have 2 different seasons which could overall be described as highly beneficial for plants. We have a deep fog followed by an intense rain, perfect for cultivating rainforest-like ecosystems. And we also have an entire lush season where plants pollinate in such severity that it invokes hay fever from players, all except Wormwood. Nevertheless, we have optimal conditions for heavy plant growth, and that is once again reflected in Hamlet's plant life. Large, lush, beautiful rainforests, extremely healthy tubers that produce an intense poison when they aren't ripe, bramble plants that grow so quickly they lock off entire sections of the map, hanging vines that try to devour any food that it can get its teeth on, and motile snap-toothed seedling plants who leap up and bound towards the nearest food source that they can find, preferably meats. But that being said, I don't actually think any of these plants are magic or significant at all. Not even the snap-tooths or hanging vines. Reason being, these plants are very clearly mindless and don't have any other functions other than simply attacking food stimuli. If you kill one of them, the other plant's first reaction is to instead eat whatever was dropped. So much so that you can easily bait them out with a single piece of meat, simply watching them get themselves killed and cannibalizing each other's corpses. And many people will reference hounds as a contention to this, as they behave similar in regards to eating their own side. And my response to that is, not exactly. Hound's first reaction is to attack you when one of their own is killed or attacked. Afterwards, it will then eat the resulting food. The snap-toothed seedlings, on the other hand, their only inherent goal is food, stopping the attack immediately, moving towards food sources without any concern for its own safety. However, aside from these plants, there is one plant entity in Hamlet who I do 100% consider to be significant aside from Wormwood. One that is both motile and sentient, and in a twisted way, can even work with the player. And that entity is the Elder Mandrake. Now, Elder Mandrakes are not a large or prominent presence in Hamlet at all. They don't have multiple faction bases like the pigs or mants, spawn everywhere like the pogs or beetles, or even have their island largely dedicated to them like the pugilisk. They are instead rather far off in the deep rainforest biome on the Pig Palace Island. Their unimportantness in regards to it being the Pig Island makes it feel as though they are almost kind of intentionally hidden from the player. There is only one single settlement of them on the entire world. There will never be more than 10 Elder Mandrakes in a world. There is no way to create or find more of them, and the only other significant thing in the Elder Mandrake village are just a few regular Mandrakes, being the only place in Hamlet you can find them besides the shop. Thus, this makes Elder Mandrakes one of the smallest factions in not only Hamlet, but all of Don't Starve. The Elder Mandrakes themselves attack players on sight and will scream what is assumed to be just gibberish at them. So, what makes them so important? Well, my previous statement is only half true. They attack players on sight unless it is a full or apocalypse moon. When it is an apocalypse moon, not only are they not hostile, but they can actually be befriended with vegetables. Why this is so important is because this, along with the fact that they have houses and names, based on the scientific names of various plants, is a blatant display that we have a plant-based creature that is not only sentient, but on the same par of intelligence as per se the pigmen. And we know, based on both their behavior and Wagstaff himself, that their temperament is at least somewhat influenced by the moon. That means we finally have seemingly the earliest instance of ancient living sentient plants. And although we don't know how old they are, plants are, in nature, capable of living indefinitely, without the burden of age. And most importantly, we know they are being directly influenced by the moon itself, even if the apocalypse was invoked by shadow creatures. We know this due to not only the Elder Mandrake's behavior in full moons as well as apocalypse moons, but how regular mandrakes are influenced by the moon, or at least the lack of it during day as well. In mainland Don't Starve, when a mandrake is picked during the day, it lets out a loud, piercing cry and dies instantly. However, if picked during dusk or night, the mandrake will emerge alive and happily follow the player around. Rather similar to the Elder Mandrake at that. And when being cooked, eaten, or put into a pan flute and played, they produce a drowsiness effect, putting anything nearby asleep, similar to how gestalts make the player tired. But more on that later. With that, I think it's safe to assume that mandrakes, at least at a base value, may have also originated from Hamlet, as there is no other developed mandrake faction currently in existence, and may only be able to reproduce in Hamlet due to the extremely preferential plant environment there. If that was the case, then it would make just as much sense as to why mandrakes are so rare. And furthermore, why they act the way they do when they are not in the presence of the moon. The moon's hue is the environment that they were born into. When they aren't in that environment, and this at least semi-reflects that they will either become aggressive and animalistic, or outright die to the lack of moon exposure. Whatever the case, the important thing is that we have factually proven that mandrakes, whether they be elder or not, have a symbiotic relationship with that of the moon, as younger breeds of mandrakes cannot even survive unless it's at least dusk out. Furthermore, we also know that their mood and behavior is also significantly influenced by this moon, and can be the discerning factor of whether or not they work with the player. This is very important as, so far in our study, no other plant in the entirety of DST has this level of sentience, save for Wormwood. And where did Wormwood come from? Well, he came from the moon as well. Now, in regards to the moon, I'll admit I was somewhat dreading this part, as the moon is probably the second largest, if not the largest character currently in the Don't Starve storyline, and also the entirety of the Lunar Alignment super faction, with the first largest being them, or the Shadows. And the part that throws a wrench at this situation is the moon, whose name we currently believe to be Alter, was also declared as likely one of them. I actually do have an idea for a theory of the whole of them and DST as a whole, but that is for another video that I may or may not do. Right now, I will mainly be talking about Alter's influence on the fauna and organisms of the Constant, and maybe we can hypothesize some of their goals and what they are doing. Alter appears mainly by consensus of the community, seems to not only just be considered the moon, but a giant eye as well inside of the moon, that you can see staring down at players from the Return of Them shorts. We also know that the gem that made Wormwood fell directly from Alter into Hamlet, meaning it does have just as much reach in Hamlet, and that a piece fell off of it to create the Moon Island, which it most likely did intentionally. So we have Elder Mandrakes, the seeming progenitors of the Mandrakes and the Constant, plants that seem to be more than anything helpful to players and carrying a friendly disposition, when in the moon's presence at least. Let's shift the conversation to other plant entities. Starting off with arguably the most useful of the plants, the lure plant. The lure plant does not attack anything on its own, and seems to be able to just produce a leafy meat out of literally nothing, and leafy meat itself is exceedingly rare, with only 10 mobs in the entirety of Don't Starve able to drop it. However, the lure plant is also the only one that is able to produce it from literally nothing. Furthermore, it's also one of the only plants that does not attack Wormwood at all. Other plants like snap-tooth flytraps and hanging vines only won't attack Wormwood if he doesn't have meat. Seawoods will attack Wormwood in self-defense, and other plants like tree guards, saladmanders, and elder mandrakes don't give Wormwood any special treatment at all. Therefore, I think my previous assessment was actually wrong in regards to elder mandrakes, and Wormwood being the only sentient plants, as it appears that lure plants are smart enough to discern Wormwood as an ally. And you might ask, why? Well, look at the eye plants that the lure plants spawn, the same type of one-eye organism that we see from Alter. Furthermore, Wormwood can craft these lure plants himself, costing only some of his health to do so, spreading them all around the world. And you may ask, well, why? Why is Alter propagating such a powerful plant on the surface? Well, I think it's important to understand what the lure plant does. It doesn't just produce meat, it consumes literally everything it can get its eye plants on, though it takes a particular interest in meat and using it to lure mobs to it to then attack and capture and later digest. Therefore, I think the lure plants are dual-purposed, being used both to terraform the land to make it more populated with Alter's plants as well as giving it the ability to see on the surface via its eye plants, and because they're searching for something. But what? What would Alter be searching for in the Constant that is so important to its plants? Furthermore, the moon appears to favor the use of two specific creature types, that being all the plants we've talked about and the enhanced plants, but also the corpses of animals, taking manual control of both of these via gestalts. Speaking of which, gestalts raise their own question, like how can they radically mutate plants and the corpses of animals, like what we've seen with the armored Berger, crystal deerclops, possessed Varg, and brightshade husk, but there are other beings on the moon that are reanimated as well by just being in the moon's presence like hounds. We've seen instances of shadow creatures affecting other creatures, like in the case of monster meat, mutation, and insanity. However, this most commonly affects just living animals, and usually it doesn't have a direct possession except in the case of them on the murals. Gestalts, on the other hand, can seem to only work their magic on the dead animal or any living plant. But we now have almost a complete encompass of all the possible combinations of what can happen when the moon shines its lights on an organism. If it is an animal, regardless of if it's apocalypse or not, it is at least semi under the sway of nightmare fuel. It has a chance of devolving into some primal-like beast we see with most species of pigmen, woody, and picos under the moon. Almost as if the shadow is retroactively preparing them for a fight with Lunar. Even Chester will transform if he has nightmare fuel under the full moon. And there are other transformations that happen as well in the Constant due to the fuel and monster meat, but these ones are specifically induced by the moon. And as shown with Weber and Wirt, certain creatures like merms and spiders can even be induced into lunar entities instead of shadow via moonglass, which really threw a wrench into things, given all we know. However, when it comes to plants and fungi, some of them receive massive growth spurts and buffs during a full moon, like seaweeds that only grow during a full moon, and mushrooms that can become mush trees. But for other plants, under an apocalypse, we see a direct increase in cooperation and growth, as displayed by the elder mandrakes, with the other flora on Hamlet displaying the growth potential. But, to be honest, none of that is really connecting for me. There's simply not enough connection with it to the moon alone, so I'll move on to gestalts and Leafy. After all, I'm not looking at lunar and shadow alignment itself, but the entities and organisms comprised of plants, and how and why they're here. Now, I think one of the main things that ties this into its own theory in a direct contrast to monster meat and nightmare fuel-induced monsters is this single item known as Leafy meat. I already have a theory on monster meat, and I think many people have already made the blatant opposites observation when it comes to shadow and lunar alignment in regards to pure horror and pure brilliance, gestalts and shadows, dreadstone and brightshade husk, etc. But I haven't really seen anybody make the direct display of the contrast between these two meats, and how they are basically the opposite mutation of the two alignments. And despite plant meat being generally more healthy to the player, these two pieces of meat are actually more similar than you think. Take some of the observations of some of the characters, for example. Numerous characters describe both plant and monster meat as smelling foul or rotten, and having a generally unpleasant taste. This actually came as a surprise to me, as I generally believed plant meat to be a rather nutritious and healthy thing to consume, and although that appears to be correct, there also appears to be an imminent negative reception towards consuming it. And for this, I actually have a theory. And that theory, as for why the plant meat is the way it is the simple idea that plant meat is directly grown and mutated from rot. And at a surface level, that doesn't really seem like that is much of a theory or revelation. I mean, plants and fungi in the real world literally get their nutrients from rotten, decaying matter, and literal feces, so what's the big idea? But I don't mean that. I mean plant meat is literally directly mutated from rotten creatures. We have various creatures in the game that all drop leafy meat, however only a handful of them consume biomass like lure plants. Carrats, hanging vines, and snaptooths, whereas grass geckos, saladmanders, and SCP-682 do not. However, we have several other creatures that are made out of plants that don't drop it at all, like birch lords, mandrakes, and seaweeds. So none of these, with the exception of lure plants, really enforce my claim that much at all so far. Now, what enforces my claim the most is the same thing that's given me the most trouble on this theory, and that's back to the mutations of animals in the presence of the moon. Whether it's hounds, spiders, merms, or even the bosses, most all of them seem to have this semi-zombie-like appearance, like they're literally walking, reanimated corpses. And yes, that's what they are, in a sense. Likely even in the cases with horror hounds where we don't see a gestalt enter them, or in the case of merms who are... Well, I'm not really sure if Don't Starve's universe considers them to be undead or not, seeing as how they are already enthralled to the knob. Nevertheless, these are in many ways reanimated corpses, and what do each of the reanimated bosses drop? Rot. And when you put moonblind crows and misshapen birds into a birdcage and feed them, they spit out more rot. So, is it too much to assume that the gestalts inside of these creatures are potentially hastening up the decomposition process to make way for plant-like growths to overtake the creature? Plant-like growths that eventually fully overtake the organism and result in a new creature entirely, which is what I feel happened in the case of creatures like carrats and saladmanders. Yes, we have plenty of creatures on the Constant that are combines of two different animals, but what about the combinations of plants and animals? You have the plant creatures. And I think this, as it encapsulates a majority of organisms affected by the moon, and a general foul stench of plant meat, that this is fairly plausible that they are technically zombies. However, there are two exceptions to this. The first one comes from a creature that I already extensively talked about, known as the Lord of the Fruit Flies, and if you want to know more about this creature and my previous views on it, I suggest watching the Pig Theory. And from how fruit flies interact with the world, I actually feel as though their behavior is pretty on par with the narrative of terraforming the planet and making more plant creatures, as they only show up when there is rotten plants present, meaning both that there is rot and there are plants dying, so understandably they would come in order to press the attack against players for not properly taking care of plant cultivation. The part that makes Lord Fruitfly difficult is the previous narrative I have attached to it. If you don't know what that is, essentially in my History of the Manse and Pig theory, I surmised that the Lord of the Fruit Flies was actually the partner of Queen Womant of the Manse and Hamlet due to various factors, such as the color and the termite queen and king size difference. And although I do still think Lord Fruitfly and Queen Womant are at least loosely related and working together, I was actually wrong about Lord Fruitfly's interpretation, as the Lord itself doesn't rot any plants and rather shows up at the sight of them. As for what's going on, I'm not entirely certain, but I think the simplest solution behind it is that Queen Womant and Lord Fruitfly have two separate entities supporting a common goal at defeating Pigmen and Hamlet. For Queen Womant, that is Ancient Herald and whoever he's attached to, and for Lord Fruitfly, that's Altar. Now, the other exception is a bit harder, as it's one that I simply don't know if I can come up with a reason for, and that is Moonrock Pingles, the lunar mutant form of Pingles. They appear on the Moon Island and are inherently hostile and even lunar aligned. However, even though it makes no sense, they drop monster meat. It makes sense for other lunar mutant creatures like shattered spiders and horror hounds to drop monster meat because they were once monsters themselves, and their monster meat likely just hasn't rotted off entirely yet. But why Pingles? Standard Pingles never have or drop monster meat on their bodies, yet for some reason they drop it when they are in their lunar moonrock variant. Even on their bodies, you can see ice and seemingly rotted flesh comprised of a brain that would seemingly only be made out of nothing more than rotten eggs and decay. So, why? Perhaps since it's gone 3/4 of the year that these Pingles aren't actually made of monster meat, but instead were hunting creatures that were made of it, and in turn when they died in the depths of the ocean and came back, they still had pieces of monster meat frozen to their body, as we do know that Pingles are capable of carrying items. I'm still not too sure, but it's the best solution I currently have. So, rounding it all back together, what we have so far is a deep history of motile plants that have been slowly evolving in the background of the constant and have been cultivated by Altar's light turned into a red hue by the apocalypse eclipse. Most starting in Hamlet, one of these species having become sentient as the Mandrakes, and being ageless plants, they have grown to an impossibly old age and sending their offspring off across the constant, having the same narcoleptic sleep-inducing effect that many minions of modern Altar also exhibit. However, as time went on and more full moons induced on the mainland along with more preferential plant conditions, other more sophisticated plant creatures like lure plants were able to sprout and cultivate the tide of plant organisms on the land even more. And with an awakening underground and the return of them, we have Altar, dropping a piece of itself onto the surface of the constant, allowing its more heavily adapted creatures to make their way onto the constant, and even entities seemingly made out of pure light, the gestalts, seemingly to both invade the constant while also searching for something in the world. Even erecting an intelligent leader of plant creatures, the Lord of the Fruit Flies, in order to help with the efforts of plantifying the surface. However, there is another agent in Altar's deck, and he seems to be pretty important to Altar's plans. Spawning in at Hamlet with direct powers from the moon itself, we have seemingly the most important of all plant creatures in the constant, Wormwood. Now, Wormwood is probably the main reason why most of you even click this video, because they want to learn more about the wholesome, friendly plant kid. Well, I think Wormwood's backstory lore, or at least a fair portion of it, is actually obvious or easy to figure out. We know based on his trailer that he is a plant organism morphed into consciousness from a special green gem dropped from the moon directly. Wormwood has an allegiance to various plants as well, including ones like the lure plant, though strangely not with that of deadly brightshades. One of the most solid cases for Wormwood, however, is his skill tree, which is not only completely absent of any shadow alignment, but even absent of wagstaff in its entirety. Wormwood's only alignment belongs to that of the moon, using his lunar roots to either cultivate more plants or become a more powerful combatant. Well, this alignment would certainly fit within the narrative of terraforming the domain of the constant. Most of his summons are of the same lunar plants I've mentioned, with the exception of berry bushes and monkey tails. Those being carrats, saladmanders, lightbugs, lure plants, and even lunar saplings. And even with the enhancements for using lunar-aligned tools and having his own crafting recipe of spiked bramble husk armor, there is absolutely no doubt that Wormwood is on the side, or at least on the alignment, of his creator, Altar. Therefore, I kind of want to shift gears in regards to that, and instead talk about what makes Wormwood special. And one of the biggest questions I have is about the green gem, and how that's essentially what he is. The green gem came falling down into Hamlet, causing a bunch of nearby plants to immediately wrap around and generating a rather specific form of wormwood if you think about it, both bipedal and roughly human-sized. What is so special about this green gem compared to every other green gem? Is it a different gem entirely, or did Alter simply do something to this gem? Like allowing knowledge to swim inside, kind of like the purple gem has, but instead of forbidden knowledge, it was pure brilliance. And in regards to other gems, with the exception of the iridescent gem, if we are to take Wilson's gem crafting into account, the green gem is the single most valuable standing at the top of Wilson's crafting hierarchy and costing more than all the other gems. As if he were to start crafting at blue and red gems, it would take him 54 gems in total of other gem types in order to obtain a single green gem. And furthermore, if we are to take interpretation of what the other gems are capable of into account, red being fire and warmth, blue being ice and cold, purple being mystery and power, orange being form and stability, yellow being light and energy, and green being that of nature, life, and growth. And with it comes the green gem's crafting recipes of the construction amulet and the deconstruction staff. And I might even be right at that, pure brilliance swimming around inside of it, as when you equip the construction amulet, it produces a positive sanity aura of 2 per minute. So, Wormwood may very well be that of just pure brilliance swimming around inside of a green amulet, capable of giving himself form by the same plants his creator Alter invokes. And it may just be a different kind of green gem, but so far, based on all that I've seen, the evidence fits for now at least. Back to Wormwood's body and how Wormwood came down both bipedal and human-sized. Most importantly, Wormwood came down as both intelligent but capable of speech. Something in regards to altar and moon plants that we have only seen from elder mandrakes, and even then, not particularly well. However, Wormwood is not like the mandrakes, lord of the fruit flies, or any other plant. Just like how Weber isn't like the other spiders, Wort isn't like the other merms, and Wilbur isn't like the other monkeys. Wormwood is smart. So, I think that confirms, along with Wormwood's creation being very specifically character-shaped, that Wormwood isn't just some random creature that Alter sent down to the Constant. Lastly, Wormwood can directly grow living logs from his own body. The same seemingly alive logs that are dropped from various creatures like Elder Mandrakes, but more importantly, tree guards. The one creature we haven't quite solved for, as with poison birchnut trees, it even appears as though they are made in an altar-like image with the whole one-eye concept. Therefore, I think in regards to tree guards and totally normal trees, that they were an intentional creation by the ancient arthropodals in order to obtain and farm living logs, a mostly inherently lunar-aligned item, while still being far enough away from Alter's influence. The trees may have even been originally to farm themselves, as with their fixation on replanting more pine cones, but during the ancients' return of them with a capital T, they mutated and malfunctioned the tree guards on purpose, just like they did with practically everything else of the ancients. And it even shows that ancients had intention in regards to farming plants with both of the Shadow Alignment's combat weapons, being a scythe that can farm plants and an axe that can chop trees. Both weapons ideal for fighting plant-like entities. Well, bringing this all back to Wormwood, I think we can branch into 2 main theories about what Wormwood's purpose is as Alter's creation. The first theory is the idea that Wormwood is being used as an indirect diplomat for the moon, meant to establish relations with other survivors in an attempt to get them on the side of Alter, as if you haven't noticed, both Wagstaff and Charlie are consistently attempting to secure the players' cooperation by luring them on their side with tools and buffs. However, Alter doesn't have any way of doing that, directly interfacing or communicating with survivors. So, implement Wormwood, a talking plant and a humanoid interface who can speak to players and can't align with anything other than Alter. And lastly, he has a friendly, almost childlike disposition, looking for new friends at every possible opportunity, simply excited to be included in things. The second theory, though this one can coexist with the first, is that Wormwood, like the Lord of the Flies, is just another agent of Alter. An agent in the sense that if survivors weren't willing to progress on the path that Alter wanted, that it would be sent down as its own survivor, and potentially more in order to fulfill its objectives itself. Because after all, a lure plant will never attack Wormwood unless he attacks first, and it does appear to be looking for something. Unfortunately, we still don't know what. But maybe we can figure something out if we summarize all we've learned. So, one more time from the top. In the constant, we have Alter, the giant eye moon in the sky, capable of looking down at the constant. We know under its moonlight that it can induce terrifying mutations in animal creatures, often specifically those that have been touched or infected by monster meat and or nightmare fuel. However, its light also brings about brilliant and complex mutations and growths in plants, and especially when its light has been distilled in a red hue due to an eclipse that can form even motile, complex, and intelligent plant life capable of rational thought. And it can even do this in its sleep, as it seemingly has been in a dormant state for a very long time. However, recently, due to an event in regards to the shadows and the forbidden knowledge on the other side of the helix, it has caused Alter to awaken. Alter's awakening caused a piece of the moon itself to fall down onto the constant, forming an island filled with mobile flora, much like what grows in the shadows of its moonlight. With it also came gestalts, powerful ghost-like beings, serving as the antithesis of shadows, but more importantly, capable of reanimating the corpses of animals, turning them into fierce monsters while also slowly decomposing them into rot, which would then be directly mutated into Leafy meat. But that isn't enough. Alter needed agents, and in doing so, he created the Lord of the Fruit Flies, a powerful minor prince that could travel both to and from Hamlet, serving to cultivate its own small force of plants, while also overseeing the growth of crops in the region. And Wormwood, a sentient green gem infused with the same pure brilliance that Alter itself sheds, capable of complex thought, friendship, and cultivation of other plants, fungi, and moon entities, capable of moving forward on his own and completing objectives and quest lines on behalf of Alter as the campaign of Don't Starve continues on further and further past the endgame, standing up against even the ancient Fuel Weaver, Daywalker, and whatever shadow entities lie behind it. But Alter also made lure plants, creatures that can make plant meat both out of rot and seemingly out of thin air, and allowing Alter to have eyes, literally, in various locations across the constant and grabbing what they can and seemingly digest that. Or maybe they move these items to an internal reservoir somewhere. What are they searching for? It could be more green gems to create more wormwoods. Could it be forbidden knowledge or shadow artifacts to remove them from the shadow's possession? Or could it be something else that we haven't seen that was even the reason why they returned with a capital T, both Alter and the shadows? But as time goes on, we continue to see Alter ramping up its forces, with more and more survivals capable of joining its side alongside Wormwood, such as Weber's Shattered Spiders, or most recently, Winona and Wirt with Winona's brilliant catapults, and we're able to literally mutate living merms into lunar variant merms, with similar spines to Wormwood's bramble armor. Lunar merms, lunar spiders, lunar hounds, lunar plants, anything that the shadows haven't touched, and even some creatures that they have. That is Alter's plan, mutating living flora and taking control of dead animals, creating a mutated army of plants to take control over the constant in a lunar assault. And we don't know if its intentions of taking over the constant are the same as what happened with the shadows and the ancient pigmen or the ancient arthropodals, if it's better or worse, but every lunar alignment brings it closer to its victory, and that is the moon plant theory. And that's the moon plants theory. A rather neutral story about one of the gods of the constant, a whole overlap of all motile plants in the constant encapsulating several creatures, the gestalts and what they may actually be, and of course Wormwood, the plant friend of all other characters. My theories so far have had several different themes: sadness, hope for the future, scientific principality, and even anticipation of future conflict. However, I think the moon's plants theory is overall one of the most neutral, simply due to the fact that we don't entirely know of what Alter or its plans are. Surely Alter is part of them, as it was kind of ratted out in the update name, therefore it likely has blood on its hands with both the ancient arthropodals and ancient pigs, but we can't be certain either. And yeah, it would be sad if we found out later on that Wormwood may end up being a double agent for Alter and turn on the survivors later on, but I don't believe that. Simply because, although Wormwood is an ancient and permanently aligned to Alter, he can still move on the Shadow campaign and work for Charlie just as much. And plus, Wormwood doesn't seem like the type to betray his friends. In other words, I think Wormwood is safe from that omen. Plus, also, Alter doesn't appear to be without mercy, as there are plenty of other characters that can align with him, but it does still ask the question of Alter and why is it building this invasion force and what it's looking for. Is it trying to fight off the other eye creature? Maybe it's trying to fight the Gnaw. Or is this the type of creation just in its nature, and it's like what Maxwell said, they just watch. What? Wormwood, Alter just won the US presidential election by a unanimous vote. What did you do inside the server room?